Sarah Martinez walked through the glass doors of Davidson and Associates, her black heels clicking against the marble floor. The downtown Seattle office building stretched 40 stories high, and she would be working on the 32nd floor. Her new job as a project manager seemed like the perfect fresh start after leaving the military. She had spent 8 years in the Navy, with the last 4 as part of an elite special operations unit. Very few people knew about her real background. On her resume, it simply said Navy Operations Specialist. Most civilians didn't ask for details, and she preferred it that way. The elevator ride to her floor felt longer than usual. Sarah checked her reflection in the polished steel doors. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a professional bun. Her navy blue blazer hid the lean muscle she had built over years of intense training. To anyone looking, she appeared to be just another corporate professional starting a new job. When the elevator opened, she stepped into a modern office space with glass conference rooms and open workstations. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the carpet. "You must be Sarah," said a voice behind her. She turned to see a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair and a warm smile. "I'm Jennifer, your supervisor. Welcome to the team." Jennifer gave her a quick tour of the office. The company specialized in large construction projects, managing everything from shopping centers to office buildings. Sarah's job would involve coordinating between different contractors, managing budgets, and making sure projects stayed on schedule. "Your desk is right over there." Jennifer pointed to a workstation near the windows. "The team is excited to have someone with your experience. Your military background will be really helpful for keeping projects organized." As Sarah settled in at her desk, she noticed her coworkers arriving for the day. Most seemed friendly enough, offering quick introductions and welcoming smiles. The office had about 30 people, split between project managers, engineers, and administrative staff. Around 10 in the morning, she was introduced to the rest of her immediate team. There was Marcus, a veteran project manager in his 50s who had been with the company for 12 years. Lisa, a young engineer fresh out of college. And then there was Derek Thompson. Derek was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his late 30s. He wore an expensive suit and had the kind of confident swagger that filled a room. When Jennifer introduced them, his handshake lasted a bit too long, and his smile felt more like a challenge than a greeting. "So, Sarah Martinez," Derek said, looking her up and down in a way that made her uncomfortable. "Navy girl, huh? I bet you're used to taking orders." "That's good, because I run things around here when it comes to the big projects." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though something in Derek's tone set off warning bells. She had dealt with men like this before, guys who thought military service made you either weak or overly aggressive. They were usually wrong on both counts. "I'm looking forward to working with everyone," she replied professionally. Over the next few weeks, Sarah threw herself into learning the company's systems and procedures. The work was different from military operations, but project management skills transferred well. She quickly proved herself capable of handling complex schedules and coordinating multiple teams. However, Derek Thompson was becoming a problem. It started with small things. Comments about her appearance during team meetings. Jokes about whether she could handle real pressure since military work was just following orders. He would stand too close when reviewing documents, or find reasons to touch her shoulder or arm during conversations. Sarah had dealt with harassment before, both in civilian jobs and occasionally in the military. Her usual approach was direct, but professional. After Derek made another inappropriate comment about her fitting in well with the boys, she decided to address it. "Derek, can I speak with you privately?" she asked after a team meeting. They stepped into an empty conference room. Sarah closed the door and faced him directly. "I need you to stop making personal comments about me or my appearance," she said calmly. "And I'd appreciate it if you could maintain professional physical boundaries." Derek leaned against the conference table, his smile turning cold. "Oh, come on, Sarah. I'm just being friendly. Maybe you're reading too much into things. Military life can make people a little paranoid, you know?" "I'm not paranoid," Sarah replied. "I'm asking you to treat me with the same respect you'd give any other coworker." Derek's expression darkened. "You know what your problem is? You think because you wore a uniform, you're special. But you're in the real world now, sweetheart. And in the real world, you need to learn how to get along with people." The way he said sweetheart made Sarah's jaw clench. But she kept her voice level. I get along fine with people who treat me professionally. We'll see about that, Derek said, pushing himself off the table and walking toward the door. He paused and looked back. You might want to be careful about making enemies around here. Some of us have been building relationships in this company for a long time. After he left, Sarah stood alone in the conference room for a moment. She recognized the threat for what it was. Derek wasn't going to stop, and he was warning her that he had influence in the company. Over the following days, Derek's behavior escalated. He began undermining her in meetings, questioning her decisions in front of clients, and spreading rumors that she was difficult to work with. When she submitted project reports, he would find fault with minor details and send them back for revision. He started excluding her from important client calls and meetings. The worst part was how subtle he was about it. To outside observers, Derek appeared to be providing feedback and guidance to a new employee. But Sarah could see the pattern. He was trying to isolate her professionally and make her look incompetent. Other co-workers began treating her differently. Some seemed sympathetic, but unwilling to get involved. Others appeared to believe Derek's narrative that Sarah was the problem. The warm, welcoming atmosphere from her first day had turned cold and tense. Marcus, the veteran project manager, pulled her aside one afternoon. Look, Sarah, I don't know what's going on between you and Derek, but you might want to try smoothing things over. He's got the ear of some important people upstairs. What would you suggest I do? Sarah asked. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Maybe just go along to get along, you know? Derek's bark is worse than his bite. He's actually a good guy once you get to know him. Sarah nodded, but said nothing. She had heard this advice before, variations of just ignore it or try to get along. It never worked because it didn't address the real problem. Derek wasn't interested in professional cooperation. He wanted dominance. That evening, Sarah went to her apartment and changed into workout clothes. She drove to a small martial arts gym across town, the kind of place where serious fighters trained, not a commercial fitness center. She had found it during her first week in Seattle and had been going there regularly. The gym was run by Tony Restrepo, a former Marine who had transitioned into mixed martial arts after leaving the service. He was one of the few people who knew about Sarah's real background. Not the details, but enough to understand that she wasn't just another office worker looking for a hobby. Rough day? Tony asked as Sarah wrapped her hands for training. Getting there, she replied. They worked through a series of striking combinations on the heavy bag. Sarah's kicks landed with sharp, precise impacts that echoed through the gym. Years of training had made certain responses automatic. When threatened, her body knew how to react. But physical responses wouldn't solve her workplace problem. Derek wasn't physically threatening her. He was too smart for that. He was using the corporate environment as his weapon, and she needed to find a way to fight back within those rules. After her workout, Sarah sat in her car in the gym's parking lot and made a decision. She wasn't going to quit or transfer. She wasn't going to smooth things over or go along to get along. Derek Thompson had chosen the wrong person to target, and he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work early. She spent time reviewing company policies, documenting recent incidents, and preparing a formal complaint. She also began keeping detailed records of every interaction with Derek, dates, times, witnesses, and exact quotes when possible. When Derek arrived, he seemed surprised to see her at her desk, already working. His usual confident swagger appeared slightly forced. Early bird today, Sarah, he said, stopping by her desk. Hope you're not overcompensating for anything. Several co-workers looked up from their desks. Sarah turned to face Derek directly, making sure her voice carried clearly through the office. Good morning, Derek. I'm just focusing on delivering quality work for our clients. I'm sure you understand the importance of professional excellence. It was a perfectly innocent response that also served as a subtle reminder to everyone listening that work quality should be the only measure that mattered. Derek's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Of course, just make sure you can keep up with the pace around here. Oh, I can keep up, Sarah replied calmly. I've handled much more challenging situations than anything this office could throw at me. There was something in her tone that made Derek pause. For just a moment, his mask of casual confidence slipped, and she saw uncertainty in his eyes. He was beginning to realize that his usual tactics weren't having the expected effect. That afternoon, Derek tried a new approach. During a client meeting, he began questioning Sarah's recommendations for a construction timeline, suggesting that her inexperience with civilian projects might be causing problems. Sarah had anticipated this. She pulled up detailed charts and cost analyses she had prepared, walking the client through each decision point with clear, professional explanations. Her presentation was so thorough and well-reasoned that Derek's objections seemed petty and unfounded. The client, a businessman in his 60s who was developing a new retail complex, listened carefully to both perspectives. When Sarah finished her presentation, he nodded approvingly. "Ms. Martinez, your analysis is exactly what we need. This level of detail gives me confidence that the project will stay on track." He turned to Derek. "I think we should proceed with her recommendations." Derek's face reddened slightly, but he forced a smile. Of course, Sarah's thorough approach has its merits. After the client left, Derek's anger was barely contained. He pulled Sarah aside in the hallway. "Don't think you're clever," he said in a low voice. "Making me look bad in front of clients won't help your career here. I've been building relationships in this industry for 15 years. You're nobody." Sarah looked at him steadily. "I'm not trying to make anyone look bad. I'm just doing my job well. If that's a problem for you, maybe you should ask yourself why." Derek stepped closer, using his height to try to intimidate her. "You have no idea who you're messing with." For the first time since their conflicts began, Sarah allowed a small smile to cross her face. "Actually, Derek, I think you're the one who has no idea who you're messing with." Something in her voice made Derek take a step back. There was a quality to her stillness that his subconscious recognized as dangerous, even if his conscious mind didn't understand why. Sarah's strategy began the next week with small, calculated moves that Derek wouldn't immediately recognize as countermeasures. She started arriving at work 45 minutes early, using the quiet time to review files and prepare for meetings. When Derek tried to catch her off guard with last-minute demands or criticism, she was always ready with detailed responses. She also began building alliances within the company, but not in the obvious way Derek expected. Instead of complaining about him or seeking sympathy, she focused on delivering exceptional work that spoke for itself. When Lisa, the young engineer, struggled with a complex calculation, Sarah spent her lunch break helping her work through it. When Marcus needed someone to cover a client call, Sarah volunteered and handled it flawlessly. These actions served multiple purposes. They demonstrated her competence and team spirit to colleagues who might have been influenced by Derek's narrative. They also created a network of people who had positive, personal experiences working with her. Derek noticed the change in office dynamics and escalated his own tactics. He began scheduling important meetings at times when he knew Sarah had other commitments, then acting disappointed when she couldn't attend. He started copying senior management on emails criticizing her work, using corporate language that sounded professional but carried clear implications that she was underperforming. Sarah's approach to the Henderson project shows a lack of understanding of our client relationship standards. Read one email that was copied to the entire team and 3 executives. While her attention to detail is adequate, her inability to adapt to our established workflows is concerning. The email landed in Sarah's inbox while she was in a client meeting. When she read it later, she felt the familiar surge of controlled anger that had served her well during military operations. Derek was trying to create a paper trail that would justify removing her from the company. That afternoon, Sarah did something Derek didn't expect. Instead of defending herself or sending a heated response, she replied with a detailed breakdown of her work on the Henderson project, including client feedback, budget performance, and timeline adherence. She attached documentation showing that the project was actually ahead of schedule and under budget. Her response was professional, factual, and devastating. It made Derek's criticism look either uninformed or deliberately misleading. More importantly, it demonstrated to senior management that Sarah could handle pressure without becoming emotional or unprofessional. Jennifer, her supervisor, called her into a private meeting the next day. "Sarah, I want you to know that your work has been excellent," Jennifer said, closing the conference room door. "The Henderson project results speak for themselves. But I'm getting the sense there's some tension between you and Derek." Sarah had prepared for this conversation. I've noticed some challenges in communication style, but I'm committed to maintaining professional relationships with all team members. Jennifer nodded. Derek mentioned that you've been resistant to feedback and difficult to work with, but that doesn't match what I've observed from your performance or interactions with other staff. I'm always open to constructive feedback, Sarah replied. If there are specific areas where I can improve, I'd appreciate clear guidance. Jennifer studied her for a moment. Can I ask you something off the record? Derek suggested that your military background might make it hard for you to adapt to civilian workplace dynamics. Is that something you're struggling with? Sarah recognized this as a crucial moment. Derek was using her military service as a weapon, suggesting it made her unsuitable for corporate work. She needed to reframe that narrative completely. My military experience taught me the importance of clear communication, reliable performance, and putting mission success above personal ego, Sarah said calmly. If anything, it's made me more committed to team success and professional excellence. Jennifer's expression shifted slightly. That's an interesting perspective. Derek seemed to think military training might make someone too rigid or aggressive for collaborative work. In my experience, successful military operations require extensive collaboration and adaptability, Sarah replied. The stakes are high enough that personal conflicts can't interfere with getting the job done. After the meeting, Sarah realized Derek's strategy was more sophisticated than she had initially thought. He wasn't just trying to make her look incompetent. He was trying to make her military background seem like a liability. In a corporate culture that valued teamwork and emotional intelligence, being labeled as rigid or aggressive could be career-ending. That evening, Sarah made another trip to Tony's gym. This time, she asked if he knew any other veterans working in corporate environments who might be willing to share their experiences. Actually, yeah, Tony said, adjusting the focus mitts they were using for strike training. There's a guy named Rodriguez who trains here sometimes. Former Army Ranger, now works for Microsoft. And a woman named Chun, Air Force Intelligence, now at Amazon. What? Sarah explained her situation without naming names or companies. Tony listened while they worked through combinations, his expression growing more serious. I've heard this story before, he said finally. Some civilian managers see military experience as threatening, especially if they're insecure about their own authority. They try to frame discipline and competence as personality problems. Any advice? Tony thought for a moment while adjusting the targets. In my experience, guys like your coworker are bullies. They pick targets they think are vulnerable. But if you show them they chose wrong, they usually back down. The trick is making that demonstration in a way that doesn't give them ammunition to use against you. Sarah's strikes against the mitts became sharper and more precise as she considered his words. What kind of demonstration? That depends on the situation. But bullies understand power. If you can show them you have more than they thought, and that you're willing to use it strategically, they usually find easier targets. Over the next few days, Sarah began implementing a more aggressive strategy. She started documenting everything Derek did, every meeting, every email, every conversation. She recorded dates, times, and witnesses. She saved copies of all correspondence and began building a comprehensive case file. But she also did something else. She began researching Derek Thompson. Using public records and professional networking sites, Sarah learned about Derek's background. He had worked for 3 companies in the past 10 years, with notably short stays at 2 of them. He had been disciplined twice by his professional licensing board for conflicts with coworkers. Most interesting, he had been named in 2 separate harassment complaints at previous jobs, though both had been settled quietly. Derek Thompson wasn't just a workplace bully. He was a serial predator who targeted women he perceived as vulnerable. Armed with this information, Sarah refined her approach. Instead of simply defending herself, she began setting traps. During the next team meeting, Derek tried his usual tactic of questioning her recommendations in front of the group. This time, Sarah was ready. Derek raises an interesting point, she said calmly. I'd be curious to hear about his experience with similar projects. Derek, what was your approach when you managed the Westfield development? Derek looked confused. That wasn't my project. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah replied innocently. I must have misunderstood your role. Could you clarify your specific experience with retail development projects? Derek's discomfort was visible. He had been critiquing her retail development plans, but When pressed for his own expertise in that area, he had little to offer. Sarah's question exposed that his criticism was uninformed rather than experienced. "I think we're getting off track," Derek said, trying to redirect the conversation. "Of course," Sarah agreed. "I just believe it's important to understand the expertise behind feedback. It helps me learn more effectively." The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes, but it accomplished several things. It demonstrated to the team that Derek's challenges to her work weren't based on superior knowledge. It showed that Sarah could handle confrontation professionally, and it put Derek on notice that she was prepared to push back. After the meeting, Derek cornered her in the break room. "That was a mistake," he said quietly, making sure no one else could hear. "I told you I have relationships in this company. Keep pushing me, and I'll make sure you're gone within a month." Sarah poured herself coffee and turned to face him directly. "Derek, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not pushing you. I'm just doing my job well. If that feels like pressure to you, maybe we should talk about why." Derek stepped closer, using his physical size to try to intimidate her. "You think you're smart? You think your little military training makes you tough? I've destroyed careers of people much more connected than you." Sarah looked up at him with complete calm. "I'm sure you have. But I think you should know something about my background that might change your perspective." "What's that supposed to mean?" Sarah set down her coffee and spoke in a voice so quiet Derek had to lean in to hear her. "I spent 4 years in naval special operations. The training you're referring to wasn't just basic military service. I was trained to handle much more dangerous threats than anything you represent." Derek's expression changed. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Are you threatening me?" he asked, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Not at all," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "I'm just providing context. You see, Derek, people in my former line of work learned to assess threats very carefully. We learned to gather intelligence. We learned to plan strategic responses. And we learned to execute those responses with precision." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I've been watching you for weeks now. I know about your history with previous employers. I know about the harassment complaints. I know about the pattern of behavior you've used to drive out women who won't submit to your authority." Derek's face went pale. "You can't prove any of that." "Can't I?" Sarah picked up her coffee again. "Derek, you're operating under the assumption that I'm some helpless victim who doesn't know how to fight back. That's a dangerous mistake." She walked toward the break room door, then paused and looked back. "You have a choice to make. You can continue this campaign against me, and I'll continue gathering evidence until I have enough to end your career. Or you can back off and focus on your own work. Either way is fine with me. But understand that I'm not going anywhere, and I'm much better at this than you are." Derek stood frozen in the break room as Sarah walked away. For the first time since their conflict began, he wasn't sure he had chosen the right target. That afternoon, Derek's behavior shifted noticeably. He avoided direct confrontation with Sarah and seemed less confident during team interactions. But Sarah knew this was probably temporary. Men like Derek didn't give up easily. They just changed tactics. She was right. Over the next few days, Derek tried a different approach. Instead of direct attacks, he began spreading rumors about Sarah's mental stability. He suggested to coworkers that military veterans sometimes struggled with anger issues or post-traumatic stress. He implied that her calm demeanor might be hiding psychological problems. This was a more insidious attack because it played on civilian misconceptions about military service. Sarah realized she needed to address it directly. During the next team meeting, Derek made a subtle comment about stress management while discussing project deadlines. It was clearly directed at Sarah, though disguised as general advice. "That's an excellent point, Derek," Sarah responded. "Stress management is crucial in high-pressure situations. In my military experience, I learned that the most effective approach is thorough preparation, clear communication, and maintaining calm focus regardless of external pressure." She paused and looked directly at Derek. "Some people handle stress by lashing out or trying to shift pressure to others. But I found that approach usually makes situations worse for everyone involved." The message was clear to anyone paying attention. Derek was the one showing signs of stress and poor coping mechanisms, not Sarah. Marcus, the veteran project manager, spoke up. "Sarah's right about preparation. The military teaches good habits for handling complex situations." Other team members nodded in agreement. Sarah's consistent professionalism was becoming more obvious as Derek's behavior grew more erratic. That evening, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Jennifer. "Sarah, I wanted to give you a heads up about something," her supervisor said. "Derek has requested a meeting with HR about team dynamics. He's suggesting that some recent projects have suffered due to communication issues." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. Derek was escalating to formal HR action, exactly what she had been preparing for. "I appreciate you letting me know," Sarah replied. "I'm confident that the project results speak for themselves, but I'm happy to discuss any concerns HR might have." "Sarah, can I ask you something directly? Are you having problems working with Derek?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Derek and I have different communication styles and different ideas about professional boundaries. But I don't believe that has negatively impacted my work performance or team collaboration." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Derek mentioned that you might be struggling with the transition from military to civilian workplace culture. He suggested that veterans sometimes have difficulty with non-hierarchical team structures." Sarah recognized Derek's strategy. He was trying to use her military background to suggest she was the problem, while positioning himself as the reasonable team player trying to help. The HR meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. Sarah spent the week preparing like she was planning a military operation. She organized her documentation chronologically, prepared copies of all relevant emails and project reports, and researched company policies on workplace harassment and professional conduct. Most importantly, she contacted an employment attorney for a consultation. The lawyer, Rebecca Chun, was a former Air Force JAG officer who specialized in workplace discrimination and harassment cases. "Based on what you've described, you have a strong foundation for a hostile work environment claim," Rebecca told her during their meeting. "The fact that you've documented everything and tried to resolve it through professional channels first strengthens your position considerably." "I'm not necessarily looking to file a lawsuit," Sarah explained. "I just want to be prepared for whatever happens in this HR meeting." Rebecca nodded. "Smart approach. Having legal representation available often encourages employers to handle situations more fairly. They know that mismanaging a clear harassment case could expose them to significant liability." Sarah left the attorney's office feeling more confident. She had backup plans now, and Derek's attempt to escalate the situation was about to backfire spectacularly. On Thursday morning, Derek seemed unusually nervous. He kept checking his phone and appeared distracted during the morning team meeting. Sarah maintained her usual professional demeanor, but she noticed he avoided making eye contact with her. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sarah walked into the HR conference room. Present were Janet Morrison, the HR director, Jennifer, her supervisor, and Derek. Janet was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a no-nonsense expression that suggested she had dealt with workplace conflicts many times before. "Thank you all for coming," Janet began. "Derek requested this meeting to discuss some team dynamics that he feels are affecting productivity and workplace harmony. Derek, would you like to start by explaining your concerns?" Derek straightened in his chair, putting on his most professional demeanor. "Thank you, Janet. I want to be clear that this isn't personal. I have nothing but respect for Sarah's military service and her commitment to the company. However, I've noticed some patterns that concern me." He opened a folder and pulled out several documents. "Sarah has had difficulty adapting to our collaborative work style. She tends to be confrontational when receiving feedback, and she often questions the expertise of more experienced team members." Derek continued for several minutes, painting a picture of Sarah as rigid, difficult to work with, and unsuited for the company culture. He used corporate buzzwords and careful language that made his complaints sound reasonable rather than personal. "I've tried to provide guidance and support," he concluded, "but she seems to view feedback as attacks rather than professional development opportunities. I'm concerned that this dynamic is affecting team morale and project efficiency." Janet took notes as Derek spoke, then turned to Sarah. "Sarah, would you like to respond to these concerns?" Sarah had anticipated this moment for weeks. She opened her own folder, which was significantly thicker than Derek's. "Thank you, Janet. I'd like to address Derek's concerns systematically because I think there are some important facts that need to be clarified." She pulled out a series of project reports and performance metrics. "First, regarding project efficiency, and team morale. These reports show that every project I've managed since starting here has been completed on time and under budget. Client satisfaction scores for my projects average 4.8 out of 5. Janet and Jennifer examined the documents. The numbers were impressive and clearly documented. Second, regarding collaborative work style, Sarah continued. I have emails and testimonials from team members Lisa, Marcus, and 3 engineers confirming positive collaborative experiences. I voluntarily assisted colleagues with training and problem-solving outside my assigned duties. She handed over a folder containing printed emails and written statements she had collected from coworkers. Janet read through them, her expression becoming more serious. Now, regarding Derek's feedback and my responses to it, Sarah said, her voice remaining calm and professional. I'd like to share some specific examples of the feedback I've received. Sarah pulled out a chronological log of her interactions with Derek, complete with dates, times, and witness information. She began reading selected entries. October 15th, during the Morrison Project meeting, Derek suggested that I might be out of my depth because civilian projects required different skills than following military orders. When I provided detailed project analysis, he questioned whether I was capable of taking direction from civilians. Janet's eyebrows rose slightly. Sarah continued. October 22nd, Derek commented that my presentation style was too intense and suggested that military training might make someone seem aggressive to civilian clients. October 28th, he advised me to try being more feminine in client interactions. Derek's face was reddening. Those comments are taken out of context. I was providing professional guidance about client relations. Sarah looked directly at Derek. Would you like me to provide the context? I have detailed records of the complete conversations. Janet held up a hand. Let's continue with Sarah's documentation first. Sarah pulled out another section of her files. I also want to address something Derek mentioned in his opening statement. He said this isn't personal, but I have evidence suggesting otherwise. She handed Janet a folder containing printouts of Derek's social media activity and professional networking posts. These are public posts where Derek has made comments about women in the workplace, military veterans, and what he calls diversity hires. The pattern suggests that his issues with my performance may be based on factors other than work quality. Janet examined the social media posts, her expression growing stern. Derek had made several comments over the past year about women being too emotional for leadership roles and veterans being difficult to manage in civilian environments. Furthermore, Sarah continued, I've discovered that Derek has been involved in similar conflicts at previous employers. I have documentation showing harassment complaints filed against him at his last 2 jobs. Derek stood up abruptly. You can't bring my previous employment into this. That information is confidential. Actually, Sarah replied calmly. This information is part of public court records from settlement proceedings. It's legally accessible information. Janet looked at Derek sharply. Derek, sit down. We'll discuss your previous employment records separately. Sarah wasn't finished. I want to be absolutely clear about something. I've tried to resolve this situation through professional channels. I've focused on work quality, maintained respectful communication, and documented everything carefully. She pulled out her final folder. However, Derek's behavior has escalated beyond professional disagreement. Last week, he approached me in the break room and made statements that I interpreted as threats to my employment. He specifically mentioned his intention to destroy my career and suggested that my military background made me unsuitable for civilian work. Sarah handed Janet a detailed written account of the break room incident, including exact quotes and the names of 2 coworkers who had witnessed Derek's agitated behavior afterward. I need everyone to understand that this isn't about personality conflicts or communication styles. This is about a pattern of discriminatory behavior targeting my military background and gender. The conference room was silent for a long moment. Janet reviewed the extensive documentation while Derek sat pale and speechless. Jennifer looked stunned by the thoroughness of Sarah's presentation. Finally, Janet spoke. Derek, these are very serious allegations. Do you want to respond to the specific claims Sarah has made? Derek seemed to be struggling to find words. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated. Those conversations were misinterpreted. I never threatened anyone's employment. I was just trying to provide honest feedback about workplace adaptation. What about the social media posts and your previous employment history? Janet asked. Those posts were personal opinions, and my previous jobs were. There were misunderstandings. People who can't handle direct feedback sometimes file complaints. Sarah recognized that Derek was digging himself deeper. His responses were confirming exactly what her documentation suggested, a pattern of problematic behavior that he refused to acknowledge or change. Janet closed the folders and looked around the table. I need to review all of this information thoroughly. In the meantime, I'm implementing an immediate action plan. She turned to Derek. Derek, you're being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. You'll receive details about the process from HR tomorrow morning. Derek's face went white. Administrative leave? This is ridiculous. She's been building a case against me from day one. This whole thing is a setup. Derek, Janet said firmly, I suggest you contact your union representative or consider legal counsel. The investigation will be thorough and fair, but these allegations are serious enough to warrant immediate action. After Derek left the room, Janet turned to Sarah. I want to apologize on behalf of the company. This situation should never have been allowed to escalate to this point. I appreciate that, Sarah replied. My goal was never to get anyone fired. I just wanted to do my job without harassment. Jennifer spoke up for the first time since the meeting began. Sarah, I have to ask, why didn't you come to me sooner with this documentation? Some of these incidents happened weeks ago. Sarah had prepared for this question too. Jennifer, I tried to handle it professionally first. I spoke directly with Derek about his behavior. I focused on delivering excellent work performance. I only began formal documentation when it became clear that his behavior was escalating rather than improving. That makes sense, Janet said. Can I ask about your legal consultation? Do you plan to pursue action outside the company? Sarah appreciated Janet's directness. I consulted with an attorney to understand my rights and options. At this point, I'm hopeful that the company's investigation will address the situation appropriately. The message was clear. Sarah had legal backup, but she was giving the company a chance to handle it internally. Over the next week, the office atmosphere changed dramatically. Derek's absence was immediately noticeable, and rumors spread quickly about why he was gone. Sarah maintained her professional focus, but she could feel coworkers looking at her differently. Some colleagues approached her privately to share their own experiences with Derek. Lisa, the young engineer, admitted that Derek had made her uncomfortable on several occasions, but she had been afraid to report it. I thought it was just me, Lisa said during a coffee break. I figured I was being too sensitive because I'm young and new. Marcus surprised Sarah by stopping at her desk one afternoon. I owe you an apology, he said. I told you to just get along with Derek, but I knew he was a problem. I should have supported you instead of telling you to smooth things over. I understand why you did that, Sarah replied. Office politics are complicated, and no one wants to get involved in conflicts. Still, Marcus said, what you did took guts. A lot of people have complained about Derek over the years, but no one ever documented it like you did. Most people just transferred to other teams or left the company. That comment revealed something important. Derek's behavior had been an open secret in the company, but no one had ever challenged it effectively. Sarah's military training and systematic approach had finally provided the tools to hold him accountable. On Friday afternoon, Janet called Sarah into her office for an update. The investigation is still ongoing, but I wanted you to know that we've found corroborating evidence for your claims, Janet said. 3 other employees have come forward with similar experiences, and Derek's personnel file shows a pattern of complaints that weren't properly addressed. Sarah nodded, but didn't express satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. We're also implementing new harassment prevention training and updating our reporting procedures, Janet continued. Your documentation has helped us identify gaps in our current system. I'm glad something positive can come from this situation, Sarah replied. Janet studied her for a moment. Can I ask you something? Your approach to this whole situation was remarkably strategic. Is that something you learned in military service? Sarah considered the question. Military training teaches you to assess. The following Monday brought unexpected complications. Sarah arrived at work to find an email from Janet Morrison requesting another meeting at 10 o'clock. The subject line read, Investigation Update, Urgent. When Sarah entered the HR conference room, she found Janet looking more serious than she had ever seen her. Also present was David Kim, the company's legal counsel, and Robert Davidson, the senior partner whose name was on the building. "Sarah, thank you for coming," Janet began. "We have some developments that require immediate discussion." David Kim opened a legal folder. Over the weekend, Derek Thompson hired an attorney and filed a counter-complaint claiming defamation and wrongful termination. He's also alleging that you created a hostile work environment for him through what he calls intimidation and threats. Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same mental state she had learned to maintain during high-pressure military operations. She had anticipated this possibility. "I see," she replied evenly. "What specific claims is he making?" Robert Davidson leaned forward. "Derek is claiming that you used your military background to intimidate him and other employees. He's alleging that you made veiled threats about your special training and created fear in the workplace." Sarah recognized Derek's strategy immediately. He was trying to weaponize her own strength against her, painting her military experience as threatening rather than professional. "He's also claiming," David continued, "that you conducted unauthorized investigation into his personal and professional background, violating his privacy and creating a campaign of harassment against him." Janet added, "Derek's attorney is arguing that the company acted hastily in placing him on administrative leave based on what they call manufactured evidence from someone with military psychological training in manipulation." Sarah processed this information quickly. Derek's counterattack was more sophisticated than she had expected, but it had a fundamental weakness. It relied on stereotypes about military veterans that could be easily disproved. "Mr. Davidson, Mr. Kim, may I ask what outcome Derek is seeking with this complaint?" Sarah asked. "Full reinstatement, a formal apology from the company and from you personally, and financial compensation for what he calls career damage," David replied. "He's also demanding that you be transferred to a different department or terminated." Robert Davidson studied Sarah carefully. "Sarah, I need to ask you directly. Did you make any statements to Derek that could be interpreted as threats?" Sarah had prepared for exactly this question. "Mr. Davidson, I told Derek that I had been trained to handle dangerous situations and that I was better at strategic thinking than he realized. I also informed him that I had researched his background and found public records of harassment complaints at previous jobs. Did you intend those statements as threats?" David Kim asked. "No, I intended them as information that would help him make better decisions about his behavior toward me," Sarah replied calmly. "I was trying to encourage him to stop his harassment by making it clear that I was not the vulnerable target he assumed I was." Janet spoke up. "Sarah, Derek is claiming that your systematic documentation and research into his background constitutes stalking and harassment." Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out another folder. "I brought additional documentation that might be relevant to these claims." She handed copies to each person in the room. "These are transcripts of security camera footage from common areas where Derek and I interacted, along with timestamps that correspond to my written documentation. I've also included witness statements from co-workers who observed our interactions." David Kim examined the documents. "You obtained security footage?" "I requested it from building security as part of my documentation process," Sarah explained. "I wanted objective evidence to support my accounts of what occurred." Robert Davidson looked impressed despite the serious nature of the meeting. "This level of documentation is thorough." "Mr. Davidson, I need you to understand something," Sarah said, leaning forward slightly. "Derek is trying to portray my military training as a liability, but that training is exactly what allowed me to handle this situation professionally rather than personally." She pulled out another document. "This is a psychological evaluation I received during military service, along with character references from commanding officers. If Derek wants to make my military background an issue, I can provide extensive documentation of my psychological fitness and professional conduct." Janet read through the military documents. "Sarah, these evaluations are extremely positive. They describe you as having exceptional emotional control and professional judgment." "That's correct," Sarah replied. "Derek's claim that military training made me threatening or unstable is contradicted by 8 years of professional evaluations and successful missions." David Kim was taking notes rapidly. What about Derek's claim that you violated his privacy by researching his background? Sarah had anticipated this question too. I accessed only public records, court documents, professional licensing information, and social media posts. Nothing I obtained required any unauthorized access or violated any privacy laws. She handed over another folder. I've included a legal memorandum from my attorney explaining exactly what information is legally accessible and why my research was within appropriate bounds. Robert Davidson read the legal memo carefully. Your attorney is Rebecca Chen? Yes, she's a former Air Force JAG officer who specializes in employment law. I know Rebecca, Robert said. She has an excellent reputation. The room was quiet for a moment as the three company representatives absorbed Sarah's response to Derek's counterattack. It was clear that she had anticipated his strategy and prepared accordingly. Finally, Robert Davidson spoke. Sarah, I have to say that your preparation for this situation has been remarkable. But Derek's attorney is arguing that this level of preparation proves you were planning to attack him from the beginning. Sarah nodded. Mr. Davidson, there's something important I need to share with you about my military background that might help you understand my approach. She paused to gather her thoughts. I served in Naval Special Operations for 4 years. Part of my training involved intelligence gathering, threat assessment, and strategic planning. When Derek began harassing me, I applied those skills to protect myself professionally. Janet looked surprised. You never mentioned special operations before. Most civilians don't understand what that means, so I usually just say Navy Operations Specialist, Sarah explained. But, given Derek's attempts to use my military background against me, I think you need to understand the full context. David Kim leaned forward. What exactly does Naval Special Operations mean? Sarah chose her words carefully. It means I was trained to handle high-stakes situations where failure could mean death. I learned to gather intelligence, assess threats, plan strategic responses, and execute those plans under extreme pressure. She looked around the room. When Derek started his harassment campaign, I didn't see a workplace bully. I saw a threat that needed to be assessed and neutralized using appropriate methods. Robert Davidson was studying Sarah with new interest. And your appropriate methods were documentation and legal research. Exactly, Sarah replied. In my world, you neutralize threats by gathering superior intelligence, planning more strategically than your opponent, and executing your plan with precision. Derek thought he was dealing with someone who would be intimidated or emotional. He never realized he was dealing with someone who had been professionally trained in conflict resolution. Janet shook her head slowly. Derek really had no idea who he was dealing with. None at all, Sarah confirmed. And that's the fundamental flaw in his current strategy. He's still trying to portray me as either a victim or a threat, but the evidence shows I'm a professional who handled workplace harassment exactly the way it should be handled, systematically, legally, and effectively. David Kim was making more notes. Derek's attorney is demanding that we settle this quickly to avoid negative publicity. They're suggesting that a public trial would be embarrassing for everyone involved. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Mr. Kim, I think Derek's attorney might want to reconsider that strategy. A public trial would mean presenting evidence in open court. Given my documentation and Derek's history, I don't think publicity would work in his favor. Robert Davidson laughed despite the tension in the room. You really did outmaneuver him at every step, didn't you? Mr. Davidson, Derek made the same mistake that many people make about military veterans, Sarah replied. He assumed that military training makes someone either blindly obedient or dangerously aggressive. He never considered that it might make someone extremely good at strategic thinking and systematic problem solving. Janet pulled out her original investigation files. Sarah, our investigation has confirmed every claim you made. We found additional evidence of Derek's misconduct with other employees, and his personnel file shows a pattern of complaints that weren't properly addressed. Furthermore, David Kim added, our legal analysis shows that Derek's counter-complaint has significant weaknesses. His claim that you created a hostile work environment is contradicted by the timeline and witness statements. His privacy claims don't hold up because all your research used legally accessible information. Robert Davidson made a decision. Sarah, I want you to know that the company stands behind you completely. Derek's termination will be upheld, and We're prepared to defend against his legal action. I appreciate that support, Sarah replied. But I want to make sure we handle this in a way that protects the company's interests as well as mine. David Kim looked up from his notes. What do you mean? Derek's strategy is to make this about military veterans being unsuitable for civilian workplaces, Sarah explained. That's not just an attack on me. It's discrimination against an entire protected class of workers. Janet's eyes widened. You're right. If we let Derek's narrative stand, it could affect how other veterans are treated in our company and others. Sarah nodded. I think we should consider a broader response that demonstrates the company's commitment to veteran employment and zero tolerance for discrimination. Robert Davidson was clearly impressed. What kind of response are you thinking about? Enhanced veteran recruitment programs, updated harassment prevention training that specifically addresses military discrimination, and a public statement about the company's values, Sarah suggested. Turn Derek's attack into an opportunity to strengthen our corporate culture. David Kim was writing rapidly. That's actually brilliant. It reframes the entire situation from defensive to proactive. Janet smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Sarah, you've turned Derek's counterattack into a strategic advantage. He thought he could intimidate us into settling quietly, but you've given us a way to come out stronger. Robert Davidson stood up. Sarah, I have one more question. Your approach to this entire situation has been extraordinarily sophisticated. Is this typical of military training, or is there something else about your background that explains your strategic capabilities? Sarah considered how much to reveal. Mr. Davidson, Navy Special Operations Training is designed to prepare individuals for complex, high-stakes situations where creative problem-solving can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She paused. Derek Thompson was never dealing with an ordinary employee who happened to be a veteran. He was dealing with someone who had been trained by the U.S. military to handle much more dangerous threats than anything he could represent. The room was silent as the implications of her statement sank in. Derek had picked a fight with someone whose professional training had been specifically designed to neutralize complex threats under extreme pressure. Derek's biggest mistake, Sarah concluded, was assuming that military TR 3 weeks later. Sarah sat in Rebecca Chen's law office reviewing the final settlement documents. Derek Thompson's counter-lawsuit had collapsed spectacularly when his attorney realized the strength of Sarah's evidence and the weakness of his client's position. Derek's lawyer called this morning, Rebecca said, sliding the papers across her desk. They're withdrawing all claims and accepting the company's termination decision. No settlement payment, no admission of wrongdoing by you or the company. Derek agrees not to discuss the case publicly. Sarah reviewed the documents carefully. What changed their mind? Rebecca smiled. Your complete documentation, the security footage, the witness statements, and Derek's own personnel file created an impossible situation for them. But I think what really did it was when they realized you weren't just another harassment victim. You were someone with specialized training who had systematically outmaneuvered their client. They also discovered that 3 other women from Derek's previous jobs were willing to testify about similar harassment patterns, Rebecca continued. Your case wasn't happening in isolation. It was part of a documented pattern that would have been devastating in court. Sarah signed the final documents. So it's over? Legally, yes. Derek Thompson won't be bothering you or any other woman in your workplace again. That afternoon, Sarah returned to the office to find a different atmosphere than the one she had left weeks earlier. Derek's termination had sent a clear message throughout the company about consequences for harassment. More importantly, the leadership had implemented the changes Sarah had suggested. Jennifer met her at the elevator with a warm smile. Sarah, welcome back. I want you to know that the executive team has implemented a new veteran mentorship program based on your recommendations. You've been asked to help design the training curriculum. As they walked through the office, Sarah noticed several new faces, recent veteran hires who had been recruited through the enhanced program Robert Davidson had approved. There's someone I'd like you to meet, Jennifer said, leading her to a workstation near the windows. This is Michael Santos. He's a former Army combat engineer who joined the team last week. Michael looked up from his computer and extended his hand. Ms. Martinez, I heard about what you did here. Thank you. People like Derek make it harder for all of us veterans to find good civilian jobs. Sarah shook his hand. Call me Sarah. And thank you for your service. How are you finding the transition to civilian work? Much easier than expected, Michael replied. The company's new veteran orientation program is excellent. It addresses a lot of the misconceptions that civilian managers sometimes have about military experience. Jennifer nodded. Sarah helped design that program. We realized that Derek's attitudes weren't unique. A lot of managers in corporate America don't understand how to effectively integrate veteran skills into civilian teams. Over the next hour, Sarah met 2 other recent veteran hires and learned about the comprehensive changes the company had made. The harassment prevention training now included specific modules on military discrimination. The Veteran Mentorship Program paired new hires with successful veteran employees. Most importantly, the company had adopted clear policies about valuing military experience as an asset rather than a liability. Janet Morrison appeared at Sarah's desk around 4 o'clock. Sarah, do you have a few minutes? Mr. Davidson would like to speak with you. In Robert Davidson's corner office, Sarah found the senior partner reviewing what appeared to be performance reports. He looked up as she entered. Sarah, sit down. I wanted to discuss your future with the company. Sarah took a seat, unsure what to expect. Of course. Robert set aside the reports. Your handling of the Derek Thompson situation was remarkable. Not just the personal courage you showed, but the strategic thinking and systematic approach. That kind of capability is rare in any environment. He leaned back in his chair. I've been thinking about something you said during our last meeting. You mentioned that Derek never realized he was dealing with someone with specialized training. Can I ask what kind of specialized training? Sarah had been expecting this question eventually. Mr. Davidson, I served with Naval Special Warfare Command. Most people know it as the Navy SEALs. Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. Navy SEALs. And you were working as a project manager? Military skills translate well to project management, Sarah replied. Planning complex operations, coordinating multiple teams, adapting to changing circumstances, maintaining calm under pressure. The core competencies are very similar. Robert was quiet for a moment. Sarah, I think we've been dramatically underutilizing your capabilities. How would you feel about taking on a larger role in the company? What kind of role? I'm creating a new position, Director of Strategic Operations. You would oversee our most complex projects, lead crisis management efforts, and help integrate military veterans into leadership positions throughout the company. Sarah considered the offer carefully. That sounds like an interesting challenge. The position would come with a significant salary increase and equity participation, Robert continued. But, more importantly, it would give you the opportunity to transform how this company, and hopefully other companies, think about veteran employees. Sarah thought about her journey from that first day when Derek Thompson had tried to intimidate her to this moment when she was being offered a senior leadership position. The irony wasn't lost on her. Mr. Davidson, I accept. But I have one condition. What's that? I want the authority to review and improve the company's approach to workplace harassment beyond just veteran issues. Derek's behavior wasn't just about military discrimination. It was about creating hostile environments for anyone he perceived as different or threatening. Robert nodded. Done. When can you start? 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of a packed conference room at the National Veterans Employment Conference. Her presentation was titled, From Harassment Target to Senior Leadership: How Military Training Translates to Corporate Success. The audience included HR executives, veteran advocacy organizations, and military transition specialists from across the country. Sarah's case had become a model for how veterans could successfully navigate corporate discrimination and harassment. Derek Thompson made 3 critical mistakes, Sarah told the audience. First, he assumed that military training made me weak rather than strong. Second, he thought that corporate politics were more complex than military operations. And third, he believed that harassment victims wouldn't or couldn't fight back effectively. She clicked to the next slide, which showed her company's veteran hiring statistics. In the 6 months since implementing our new veteran integration program, we've hired 23 veterans across all levels of the organization. Our veteran retention rate is 96%, and veteran employees are receiving promotions at rates higher than the company average. After her presentation, Sarah was approached by representatives from several major corporations who wanted to implement similar programs. She had also been contacted by military transition programs asking her to speak to service members preparing for civilian careers. The most important lesson from my experience, Sarah told each group, is that military training doesn't make you unsuitable for civilian work. It makes you exceptionally good at it. The key is finding employers who understand that difference. That evening, Sarah returned to Tony's gym for her regular training session. Tony noticed the corporate attire she was still wearing. "Director of Strategic Operations now, huh?" he said, adjusting the heavy bag. "How does it feel?" Sarah wrapped her hands and considered the question. "It feels like completing a mission that I didn't know I was on when it started." "Derek Thompson ever try to contact you?" Sarah shook her head. His attorney advised against any communication. "But I heard through professional networks that he's had trouble finding new employment. Turns out that companies do background checks now, and his pattern of harassment complaints makes him a liability." Tony held the bag steady as Sarah worked through her combinations. "Think he learned anything?" Sarah landed a particularly sharp kick that echoed through the gym. "I think Derek learned exactly what happens when someone with real training decides to fight back. Whether he learned anything useful about treating people with respect is another question." A year after the Derek Thompson incident, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Jennifer, her former supervisor. "Sarah, I wanted you to know about something that just happened," Jennifer said. "Derek applied for a position with one of our client companies. They called us for a reference." "What did you tell them?" "We provided factual information about his employment termination and the circumstances that led to it. The client decided not to pursue his application." Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Derek's harassment campaign hadn't just failed, it had permanently damaged his career prospects. "Jennifer, I hope Derek eventually understands that his problems weren't caused by strong women or military veterans. They were caused by his own behavior choices." "I hope so too," Jennifer replied. "But, regardless, the changes you helped implement here have made a real difference. We've had several employees tell us they feel safer reporting problems because they saw that the company will take action when necessary." After hanging up, Sarah reflected on how completely her situation had transformed. Derek Thompson had tried to take her down by exploiting what he saw as weaknesses, her military background, and her gender. Instead, he had discovered that those characteristics, combined with proper training and systematic thinking, made her far more formidable than he had ever imagined. The lesson was clear: assumptions about people's capabilities based on stereotypes or limited information could be dangerously wrong. Derek had learned that lesson the hard way. More importantly, Sarah's victory had created opportunities for other veterans and demonstrated that corporate harassment could be defeated through preparation, documentation, and strategic action. Her experience had become a blueprint for turning workplace victimization into professional advancement. 3 years later, Sarah Martinez stood in the Pentagon briefing room where she had been invited to speak to military personnel preparing for civilian careers. The irony of her journey from harassment target to recognized expert on veteran workplace success wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Your military training has prepared you for challenges that most civilian employees never face, she told the audience of transitioning service members. Don't let anyone convince you that this preparation is a weakness. It's your greatest professional asset. A young sailor raised her hand. "Ma'am, what if we encounter discrimination or harassment in civilian workplaces?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own uncertainty when she first entered corporate America. "You document everything, you research your rights, you build alliances with ethical colleagues, and you use the strategic thinking the military taught you. Most importantly, you remember that you've been trained to handle much more dangerous situations than anything a workplace bully can create." Another hand went up. "What if they try to use our military service against us?" Then, you remind them that military service isn't a liability. It's proof that you can perform under pressure, work effectively in teams, and complete missions regardless of obstacles. Anyone who sees military experience as a negative is revealing their own ignorance. As Sarah finished her presentation, she thought about Derek Thompson one more time. His harassment campaign had been designed to drive her out of corporate America entirely. Instead, it had launched her into a leadership position where she could help thousands of other veterans achieve civilian career success. Derek Thompson had tried to take her down, but he had never learned she was someone whose military training had prepared her to win battles using whatever weapons were available. In corporate America, those weapons were intelligence, strategy, documentation, and unshakable professional determination. The student had become the teacher, the target had become the leader, and Derek Thompson's attempt to destroy one veteran's career had ultimately strengthened the prospects for countless others. Sarah Martinez had proven that when someone with real training decides to fight back, they don't just win. They transform the entire battlefield in favor of justice and equality. Aiming would make me weak in a civilian environment. In reality, it gave me exactly the skills I needed to defeat him using the tools available in corporate America: documentation, legal research, and strategic thinking. As the meeting concluded, Sarah realized that Derek's counterattack had actually strengthened her position. His attempt to weaponize her military background had forced her to reveal the full extent of her training, making it clear that his harassment campaign had been doomed from the start. Derek Thompson had tried to take down someone he thought was vulnerable. Instead, he had discovered that Sarah Martinez was a highly trained professional who knew exactly how to win battles using whatever weapons were available. The next phase of the conflict would determine whether Derek learned from his mistakes or continued fighting a war he had already lost. REITs gather intelligence and plan systematic responses. But, mostly, it teaches you that some battles are worth fighting, and when you decide to fight, you fight to win. Derek clearly underestimated who he was dealing with, Janet observed. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Yes, he did. Derek thought he was dealing with someone who would be intimidated by corporate politics and personal attacks. He didn't realize he was dealing with someone trained to handle much more dangerous situations. As Sarah left the office that evening, she reflected on how the situation had evolved. Derek Thompson had tried to use her military background as a weapon against her, suggesting it made her unsuitable for civilian work. Instead, her training had given her exactly the tools she needed to defeat him. The battle wasn't over yet. The investigation would continue, and there would likely be more challenges ahead. But Derek had learned a crucial lesson. Sarah Martinez wasn't just another target for his harassment campaign. She was a highly trained professional who knew how to fight back effectively. The next week would bring new developments, and Sarah was prepared for whatever came next. "Jennifer, I'd like to share something with you that might provide useful context," Sarah said. "My military service included extensive leadership training and collaborative operations. The idea that military experience makes someone unsuitable for teamwork is actually a harmful misconception. Can you elaborate on that? In special operations, successful missions depend on seamless teamwork, adaptability, and the ability to work with diverse groups under extreme pressure. The training actually makes someone more effective at collaboration, not less." Sarah heard Jennifer typing notes. "That's helpful context. Would you be comfortable discussing this with HR?" "Absolutely. I think a frank conversation would be beneficial for everyone." After hanging up, Sarah felt a mix of anticipation and calm determination. Derek had just made a critical error by involving HR. He thought he was escalating the conflict in his favor, but he had actually moved it into an arena where Sarah's preparation and documentation would give her significant advantages. The real battle was about to begin, and Sarah Martinez was ready to show Derek Thompson exactly what happened when someone with real training decided to fight back. That evening, Sarah updated her documentation and continued building her case. But she was also beginning to formulate a different kind of strategy. Derek had made this personal, and he clearly wasn't going to respond to professional approaches. Sarah Martinez had been trained to handle much more dangerous enemies than a corporate bully. Derek Thompson thought he knew how to break down a woman who wouldn't submit to his authority. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah allowed herself to think about the tools and skills she had developed over 8 years of military service. Most people saw a project manager in business attire. They had no idea they were looking at someone who had been forged in some of the most demanding training programs the military offered. Derek wanted a fight. Sarah was going to give him one. But it would be fought on terms he never expected, using weapons he couldn't even recognize. The game was about to change, and Derek Thompson was completely unprepared for what was coming next.